introduce Dr. Steve Windmueller, who's been with us before, but we're so glad that he's able to join us again today, talking about the LA Jewish community, a post-COVID perspective. Dr. Windmueller is an Emeritus Professor of Jewish Communal Studies and is the Interim Director at the Skirball campus of Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion here in Los Angeles. Prior to coming to Hebrew Union College, he served on the staff of the American Jewish Committee. He directed the Albany, New York Jewish Federation and the Jewish Community Relations Committee of the Los Angeles Jewish Federation. During his tenure at the college, he served for 10 years as the director of its School of Jewish Nonprofit Management, and in 2005 was named to the deanship of the LA campus from 2006 to 2010. He's an author of several books, numerous articles, and holds a PhD in political science from the University of Pennsylvania. His research has been focused on Jewish communal trends, anti-Semitism, and Jewish political behavior. And he currently serves as a fellow of the Jerusalem Institute of Public Affairs and a board member of the Pat Brown Institute at Cal State, which relates to some of the facts and information we're going to hear from today. So Steve, welcome back. We really are glad that you can join us today and update us.
Thank you, Joel, and good morning to all of you. This will be approximately a 20-minute introductory presentation having to do with the LA Jewish population study, but more specifically, the implications for us post-COVID. So as you may know, and many of you may have participated, the study was done by the Brandeis Center, the Cohen Center for Communal Studies. It's one of 25 studies that Brandeis has been undertaking this year of communities. It is the largest set of data points we have on the American Jewish community in our history. And the LA study is the first study done since 1997 of our community. So this is a significantly long trend line between the last study and this current one. The study is particularly significant since we are perceived as the second largest North American Jewish community outside of New York. So the importance here certainly has national implications. So the study does not basically ask how Jewish are you, but rather how you do Jewish, in the sense of levels of engagement versus the notion of simply understanding affiliation patterns and measures. I think we'll just go back for one moment to the previous slide. Oh, it didn't happen. So one of the outcomes here of the essential findings is that LA Jews are particularly proud to be, oops, it does it on its own. The point I was trying to make here is that we believe that about 77% of LA Jews are involved in some way with Jewish life, but that will be the interesting challenge of how we understand what those ways or measures are. 23% describe themselves as totally disconnected from the community. I'm not sure why this isn't working as it should.
We're very Jewish.
Oh, here we go. I don't know. I think I may just use the computer to do this. So as I was indicating, the pride factor of Jews is particularly significant, and social justice is a 54% average of how engaged Jews feel about living an ethical life, being involved with Israel, and family and Jewish traditions, all of which score significantly heavy, but Israel certainly scores higher with 80%. But here is the most interesting finding of the study. Younger Jews in Los Angeles are actually more engaged Jewishly than any other age cohort. So 22-year-olds to 40-year-olds, despite the fact they may not be members of synagogues, or involved in Jewish organizations or give to Federation or do other institutional things describe themselves as highly committed, affiliated, and interested in Jewish life. The second finding that is core to this study is, unlike Chicago, where a third of the Jews are unaffiliated with religious institutions, 1/2 of LA Jews do not belong to religious or institutions associated with Jewish religious life. The national average is 32%, which really is defining of a West Coast community, which we always understood that the West Coast had different patterns of affiliation, and this is clearly reflected here. But all studies, including this study, affirm that 75% of LA Jews are particularly concerned and have expressed those concerns about anti-Semitism. This is also a community with a higher percentage of people who express themselves as being LGBTQ+, 8% of the population, compared to 4% nationally. Now, why is that showing up here in LA? Probably because in a culture of openness that certainly describes the West Coast and Los Angeles, we believe that people are more candid about their identities and their affiliations. Jews of color account for about 6% of our community, but between the ages of 22 and 30, Jews of color are significantly a higher percentage. And 1 in 4 of Jews of color are younger, which suggests to us that we are likely to see this pattern continue to change and grow over time.
I guess we froze.
This is hard. It should not be hard.
It's not us.
People who describe themselves as Asian, Latino, African American, or even Jews from foreign lands, North Africa and the Middle East. The economic disparities in Los Angeles are quite significant, and 30% of Jews live in that sort of characteristic we would describe as highly problematic, with 18% of that number facing serious economic hardships. Now, we believe that's particularly true among certain groups within the Orthodox community, of singles, both young and old singles, of students, but the figures are very clearly pointing to a fact that we have really undercounted the number of Jews who are dealing with economically challenging questions of their lifestyles and their needs. On the reverse, 28% of LA Jews describe themselves as well-off or financially secure. We believe that Persian Jews, Russian Jews, Latino Jews, and Israeli Jews in Los Angeles are accounting for about 20% of our Jewish population, and that we will look at again more deeply. Amongst affiliated patterns, historically and nationally, the Reform movement shows 37% of American Jews affiliated with Reform congregations. In Los Angeles, it is 25%. So we are seeing clearly part of the disaffiliation or non-affiliation patterns, particularly reflected in this kind of statistic. The median age for Jews nationally is 49. Here in Los Angeles, it is 53. And the median age in Los Angeles County of all citizens is 35. Which points to the fact that we already knew, but we now can confirm, Jews are older than the mainstream of our community, and we see this nationally as well as now projected here in Los Angeles. And Jews tend to remain liberal, and what we see as sort of the outliers, that is, groups that are significantly less liberal or non-liberal, Orthodox, Russian, Iranian, and Israelis living within our community. Oh, I didn't realize. When you say back there. There we go. So here on the data of in-marrieds, we find that certainly the patterns as we would expect, that folks who marry other Jews are more likely to be involved in Jewish life, institutions, doing Jewish family and holiday practices, and certainly sending their kids to schools, camps, and part of youth movements. I lost it altogether. Wow. So this is not helping us.
We're muted.
There it is again.
We're muted.
I guess I'm supposed to, there we go. Oops, it goes too fast, sorry. So we have 100, this is really crazy. We have 132,000 Jewish children in Los Angeles. 89,600, according to the study, are defined as Jewish, 12,200 of other religions, and 19,700 of these kids not Jewish, which shows us the intermarriage rates, the blended family situations, and the attitudes about affiliation as reflected in the data of the numbers of Jewish kids who are involved. And certainly, we believe that we have data that suggests that among families that are both parents are Jewish, you have a higher, certainly an involvement of those folks than you do of intermarrieds or in some cases of single households, simply because of the costs of Jewish education and Jewish engagement prevents many single families from being able to afford. PJ Library, many of you know about PJ Library, is an interesting project for reading for young kids where books are sent to Jewish households for children to read about Jewish themes and subjects. And 30% or 32% of all Jewish households indicate that they are using and a part of PJ Library, which is a very important and high number. Among children and teens, we see, again, the dispersion of the fact that only 20% of Jewish children are enrolled in early childhood Jewish programs, 40% are not enrolled in any, and 20% are enrolled in non-Jewish programs. In terms of education, 52% of our Jewish kids are in public and charter schools, 25% are in private non-Jewish schools, and 15% are in Jewish day schools. 8% are in part-time schools, which would be religious schools, which is a very low and really challenging number. And yet 28% of all Jewish kids are in some form of Jewish camping, or 19% in youth organizations sponsored by our community. Okay. So I mentioned at the outset, one of the most important findings is the behaviors of younger Jews. So here we take 22 to 30-year-olds in terms of the kinds of ways by which they are participating, lighting candles. 56% of young LA Jews say they light candles on Shabbat, compared to 65 to 75 plus, only 33%. But across the board, we see with regard to Jewish meals, meaning holiday festivals, the time setting aside Shabbat to do something significant, doing something spiritual, engaged in a learning outcome, or separating from technology on Shabbat, we have much higher numbers in each of these categories of younger Jews than Jews over 40, and more specifically, the 65 plus group. We don't know exactly why and what this all may mean. What we do know is that they are not necessarily, as we said at the outset, affiliated with institutions, but their behaviors suggest a high degree of commitment to doing ceremony, understanding that their Jewish consciousness involves certain kinds of steps and behaviors. We lost it again.
This is hardly worthwhile.
That would probably be great. Okay, well, what we need, this is for the next slide, but it didn't, we have no slide now. So while we're waiting for that, let me just, oh, here we go. Can we bring the next slide up? Can we bring the next slide up?
Something is amiss.
Oh. Okay. One of the things that's most interesting is the fact that we have serious challenges in this community because of traffic, because of people feeling not welcomed, of cost factors, and a lack of interesting programs, and the confidence factor in Jewish knowledge, which we'll talk about in a minute. The other factors of traffic, the sense of not feeling welcome, and if they walk into a room and they feel they're out of place because they either don't know anyone, or there are people that don't look like them, or they in some sense feel disconnected, that is a significant number. It's almost 30% of Jews who feel it is difficult for them to walk into a Jewish setting. The cost factor, we know it's a major issue across the nation in terms of how do we deal with the cost of Jewish living in a more successful and informative way. And the 43% of folks who believe that Jewish programming is of lacks interest for them is a challenging issue of what that may mean for institutions and organizations in moving forward. The last factor is really fascinating. The sense of, I don't want to be called upon if I walk into a Jewish institution, especially a synagogue, and I'm asked to read, or I'm asked to explain, or I'm asked a question about Jewish law, tradition, or customs. So many Jews simply do not want to be caught in that situation. The national data on this is even more interesting. 37%, according to Jack Wertheimer of the Jewish Theological Seminary, and his national study shows that this is the one and profoundly important question for many Jews who simply are uncomfortable because they do not know Jewish ritual and they do not understand how to engage when they are feeling uncomfortable. So there are limitations to what we know about our community. Only 1/3 of LA Jewish adults have few friends, and that limits, of course, their participation. And 18% of Jewish Los Angelenos have no Jewish friends. So the sense of friendship as a link is profoundly important. So if 1/3 of Jews have few and 18% have none, that gives us a clue as to why we have such high levels of disconnection or non-affiliation. Some people who hold progressive political views and very conservative political views feel left out and sort of challenged in the community in the sense that they aren't welcomed because either they're too conservative or they're too progressively liberal, and they feel the community is not open to hearing them. Everyone concurs, 76% in particular concur the value of personal connections. I want to go to a program with a friend. I want to be able to walk into a meeting and see someone I know. This sense of connection is profoundly important from the whole study and is reaffirmed here. People are asked, if you're invited by a friend to do something Jewishly, will you do it? And 66% said yes. And do they see themselves in the community? Only 47% said they see themselves, meaning nearly 50+% are telling us that the audiences do not reflect their either politics, their views, their identities, their racial or cultural or diversity of their personal conduct. And of course, as we said earlier, the sense of uncomfortableness with ritual or no religious activities was profoundly important to a significant number of LA Jews who simply said, I'm just uncomfortable in a religious setting. we now know that 30% of American Jews are 65 years and over, and that's compared to 22% of the American population. So it simply reinforces that not only here in Los Angeles, but nationally, Jews are an older white ethnic constituency. We believe there are something like 36,000, what we would call Gen Zs, 18 to 24-year-olds living in Los Angeles County. Only New York has more of these people, but yet we already know from the other data that these are very interested Jewishly, and therefore it's a real challenge to our community and institutions to serve them. 58% of all Jews have graduated college and 29% of all Americans. So again, we're a highly educated community with many of those 58% having advanced degrees in addition to a bachelor's. And 63% of all Jews are lean Democratic, 29% lean Republican, and younger Jews tend to be more independent voters. Now, in a study not from the LA Jewish population study, but the work that we've done at Pat Brown Institute at Cal State LA, we see that younger voters, younger Jewish voters, tend to be highly independent. That does not mean that they may not vote Democratic or vote Republican, but they want more choice, and they view independency as giving them that choice. So I think the questions for us are about ways in which we engage younger Jews moving forward. It's also questions of diversity, choice, and friendships, where we see the challenges that we face, both of bringing people in, the challenges of Los Angeles, which are somewhat unique in terms of traffic and congestion, and yet how do we overcome some of these challenges, which will be one of our long-term objectives. What we have seen with COVID here in LA and around the country is a reduction in numbers of people attending. Yes, many more people are watching and participating. And in a study that Ron Wolfson and I just recently completed, we took a look at what we would call the rise of the National Synagogue. That is Central Synagogue in New York, Park Avenue Synagogue in New York, Temple Israel of Detroit, as just as several examples, and B'nai Yeshurun in New York. And their numbers are extraordinarily high on during COVID on Zoom. For example, Central Synagogue reported from all of its 4 different sites, whether it's live stream or Facebook or the other sites that it has created, 600,000 hits on a Yom Kippur, this past Yom Kippur. 600,000. So some of these are seekers, curious, many may not be even Jewish, just sort of curious about the idea of what is Yom Kippur, how is it observed and practiced. But those numbers were not limited to Central Synagogue. Park Avenue reported significant numbers. Even Ikar had reported to us 15,000 participants on Yom Kippur. So the point is that what we are seeing is an explosion in interest, whether it will translate into memberships, community participation on the ground, remains to be still a question. One of the things that the study did not show here, but the LA study specifically referenced, is the high degree of mental illness and loneliness that people experienced during COVID of all age sectors, but the highest was younger people. And we understand that because children were disconnected from friends, from school, from their community. And we see it with young teens and young adults in the same context, but all age groups experience this sense of isolation and in some cases mental challenges. The study also did not reflect the question, are Jews leaving LA? But we have data from outside of the LA population study that suggests that there is a good deal of movement of Jews away. Part of that was COVID. Part of that's tied to the costs of living, high tax base, congestion, crime. And we see this in Greater New York, the Bay Area, Orange County, California, and here in Southern California in Los Angeles County, where we are seeing middle-class families, Jewish and non-Jewish, opting to other parts of either California, out of state. So where's that growth going? It's going to Texas, it's going to Nevada, it's going to Idaho, it's going to Oregon, and we see transitions from being in large cities to middle-sized and smaller communities in certain of these cases. I think what we have after COVID and this LA Jewish study is some interesting outcomes. We are increasingly seeing people practicing their Judaism in a kind of privatized and virtualized manner, meaning whether it's a Zoom arrangement or going on a social platform, social media, and taking a class or learning a new skill set. We see a huge amount of that and far less involvement in institutional and in-place organizational life. So that is a fundamental change. That's one that we're really monitoring, is what will that mean for the community to come together, to have a sense of being in place? That could be profoundly challenging to synagogues and JCCs and federations and women's and men's organizations. The second factor is that both the 2008 economic recession and COVID during this pandemic, we've seen significant financial and structural challenges to institutions, to synagogues, and to other organizations. So we have seen a lot of mergers, some closures, and some downsizing of institutions in Jewish life. And all of that we think is particularly challenging as we look ahead. We can identify 15 to 18 synagogues in greater Los Angeles that are right now facing some significant economic and structural challenges as an outgrowth of some of these realities. The mental health question, which we raised earlier, is certainly about how we help people be re-engaged, how we make sure that as a community we offer the kinds of services essential to dealing with their stress, loneliness, and mental concerns. And indeed, for all American Jews, from all studies, the focus and continued concerns with the rise and intensity of anti-Semitism are all of the challenges that we think we face. I think what all of this tells us, and this, the closing slide, is that we will continue to see a smaller number of Jewish institutions. The downsizing of the American Jewish community is happening. We need to come to grips with it. Part of it is the demographics of what and how our young people are responding. Part of it certainly has to do with the economics of the situation, of costs of operations of synagogues and other institutions. But the other reality of this downsizing is how we, in a sense, reimagine community. And what will Jewish community look like moving forward? And that will be the challenge of taking this study and all the data we now have and sort of doing a kind of town hall of re-envisioning what LA's Jewish community will be evolving into by the mid part of the 21st century. We know that all of this is profoundly challenging, and to the credit of our Jewish Federation, they did this study and now they're committed to sort of taking it and organizing this sort of effort at planning and thinking about the Jewish future with the institutions such as VBS and others being part of that. So I'm going to end here. I welcome your questions, and I apologize again for the technology. I despise technology because I think it sort of disrupts the learning.
Hold on, let me give you the mic so that the folks on Zoom can hear you.
Has anybody done a study of the synagogues which have showed enormous growth over the last couple of years, like Ikar? It's an amazing story, from nothing to 1,200 families or more.
So has anyone done a study of such institutions as Ikar? Yes, I mean, there are a number of studies that have been done. Part of it tells us 3 or 4 key findings. It's all about leadership. It's also all about the fact that some of these institutions are not bound by buildings. They're bound by an idea or a concept of how to move forward. They're also, their success is tied to the fact that they appeal to a specific generational cohort, younger Jews, younger families, singles. They don't tend to try to represent themselves as multi-generational. So part of that are the outcomes of some of the studies that have been done and that we'll be looking at as we move forward. I mean, there are 7 or 8 IKAR models around the country.
What is IKAR?
Yes, IKAR is gathering, and it's yes, gathering. So the idea of IKAR is really, as with a similar operation in Seattle, one in Washington, D.C., and Boston and New York, these 8 models are all experimental in the concept. They are not tied to synagogue denominations. They're independent of those. They're organized sort of from the bottom up in the sense they each have a particular framing agenda. Social justice for IKAR is a profoundly important thing. So for Rabbi Sharon Brous, what she wants to do is to tie the tradition to social justice and grow that model as part of the mission and operational piece of what IKAR represents. So in each of those communities, you have varying sort of these organizing principles. So the reality is that these kinds of groups usually have a founder, an individual who has created it, whose vision is being implemented, and that certainly is reflected in LA with IKAR, in Washington, D.C. with Third and I, or Romamu in New York, all of them having similar sort of frameworks of individuals with vision, framing it for a particular cohort of people.
Any other questions? Barb, let me get the mic over to you.
Is it a stretch to take this data and make any determination about what's happening to the diaspora? Is it too localized to do that?
So when you say diaspora, you're certainly speaking beyond the American model. And I don't know that we can take the American demographic data and apply it onto Europe or Australia or elsewhere. Yeah. And yes, and you cannot even apply this to Canada because the Canadians are a generation or two behind us. And so there are different factors there. So what it means is a challenge on 4 fronts. Israel is one. What is the likelihood of a sustaining involvement of American Jews to and for on behalf of Israel in light of sort of the changing demographics based on this study and others? The second of these 4 is certainly the question of community and institutional life. Clearly, we're going through some huge changes about what institutions will look like, what they will mean, and how they play or don't play the same kind of roles. So that is true for Hadassah as it will be true for the conservative and reform movements. What it is not true is for the American Orthodox community. American Orthodoxy is thriving. It continues to grow. It accounts for about 10% of American Judaism today, but those numbers will accelerate, and their place and power in the Jewish community equation will clearly escalate. The third, a third factor besides community is certainly the notion of how we deliver and connect people to one another. If we don't have institutions or fewer, we have social media, but far less cohesive and integrated into the sense of community. So it creates real challenges about, you're talking about framing multiple communities of Jews, multiple avenues of involvement, but no centralization of what that will look like. And finally, the only outcomes here that are questionable are 2. If anti-Semitism becomes so significant in the mindsets of American Jews, whatever it may mean to others, but for Jews, it's profoundly scary, engaging, and important. There is the outcome here that some of us believe is it can recreate community. It can force people back into a sense of wanting to be with others who are sharing in this issue. And the other piece to this story is American religious revivalism. There have been 3 American revivals in religious life in this country: 1820s, 1870 after the Civil War, and 1940s after the Second World War. And the conservative movement just simply took off after the Second World War because of suburbia. Well, we might want to call it Encino suburbia, but that is the principle of the fact that the growth of conservative Judaism in the United States occurs from 1948 forward. And that was a phenomenon that was because American churches and synagogues all moved to suburbia. So I think those are the two potential factors for bringing people back into community. The hunger for spirituality and community, the fears from the outside because of hate and anti-Semitism, but all the other factors are challenging and problematic and weaken the diaspora position.
So do you think that young people are disillusioned by what's happening in Israel and that would turn them off more? Because they're fighting on several fronts at universities and in different places like that. So that's quite important. Okay.
Well, I think we have two battlegrounds. One, of course, are the universities and the BDS struggles and the anti-Semitism and the whole array of are Jews white? And the questioning of Jewish whiteness, which is really an interesting phenomenon. So Joel, you can invite me back on that whole topic of are Jews white? Because the far left considers Jews as no longer a minority and no longer legitimate complainers or who have no longer the right to acquire a status of being a victim of history. They are now the controllers of history. So the argument on the left is that Jews are powerful because now they are in power, they are like whites, they behave like whites, they are no longer behaving like a minority. On the far right, the charges, and you saw it in Charlottesville and we've heard it across the board, Jews will not replace us, which is that the white Anglo-Saxon notion of power and of establishment is being captured by Jews, and using their powers, they are replacing the true whites. So this whiteness question is profoundly important, and for young Jews who are being, in a sense, bombarded by some of these challenges, that's a real issue on campuses. And the question that you raise that's deeper is, so how does it affect their thinking about Israel and their belief about Israel? And the studies here do not, for the most part, demonstrate a strong fourth generation commitment to Israel. Fourth generation American Jews of all ages are far less engaged with Israel, do not necessarily know the Israel story, are not necessarily seeing Israel as a special and unique relationship to them or to their cohort. So these are particularly challenging topics, which is why Birthright Israel is in play, which is why there are all of these efforts to sort of recreate the storyline of the place of Israel in the American and world Jewish consciousness. But I will tell you quite candidly that what we are seeing with the current government and the selections that are being made about who and what will be the sort of policy directions will be challenging to younger Jews, especially. And how you sort of translate that into helping them understand this is a democracy. It makes choices, as we do. And some of those choices we may or may not necessarily accept or like, but do we disconnect from the whole society? Do we dispel the notion that we have something very special about the Israel relationship? And that's a particularly challenging issue. It can't be simply explained without some serious conversations and pushback on their part about their struggles with what they are seeing.
Yeah. Do you feel that the younger, I don't want to say younger people, but 40, 50 years old, I think that Reform Judaism is more attractive to them, and is there problems with the conservative group? That's my feeling. I have children. I mean, we were conservative, but I see a younger group more attracted to, and I also find there's a lot to say for the reform movement right now.
Well, let's start with the conservative movement. I told you in the 1940s, it was in its prime. But what we have seen in the period of the last half of the 20th century and now into the first 2 decades plus of the 21st century, a significant decline in the number of conservative Jews, both here in LA and nationally, and the number of conservative institutions. The second factor is that we are seeing some of the same patterns, frankly, within the reform movement as well. We're seeing some of the same sort of inability to capture the next generation and to reclaim, if you wish, the sense that the synagogue voice has meaning and value to that constituency. So if you walk into most reform or conservative synagogues in the United States today, you find folks who are 55 plus in the pews. And that's simply a pattern we are seeing more generically between and amongst both of these constituencies. And both are struggling to sort of figure out what all of this may mean in terms of their future. Look, the downsizing of our seminaries, sale of the AJU, the closing by Hebrew Union College of its Cincinnati Rabbinic School, and the sale of a Hebrew College in Boston. All of these are symbols and outcomes of what we are seeing on the ground. Fewer numbers of people in the pew, and the need to have multiple seminaries for training rabbis who may not or may have more difficulty finding careers in the American synagogue rabbinate. So what we are seeing is that over 1/4 of Reform rabbis are now not even serving synagogues. They're going into nonprofit institutions, into chaplaincies, into other areas of Jewish and civic life where they carry their rabbinic degrees. And we see the Great Resignation. We have a significantly high percentage of rabbis leaving their pulpits, conservative, Reform, Reconstructionists, and Renewal, simply because they are not finding the kind of engagement and partnerships that they feel they need to make the rabbinate for them and for their community successful, and are walking away. So this is a huge transition moment for the American Jewish community in all of these regards. And the synagogue is certainly the most visible to all of us, and therefore the most likely to see the most commentary.
So I have a question. Drilling down into the interfaith question, your slide mentioned that 30% of Jews in LA are intermarried.
Actually, 42%.
42%. And I've heard statistics that of the people getting married now, 50 to 60% are interfaith. Is that correct?
70% is the national average.
And what is it? Do we know what that is here?
We do not. The data is not particularly clear about current rates, but we have 42% we do of existing households that are what we would call intermarried households.
And that's been increasing, I think, over time.
Yes, I mean, it has increased. Look, in 1970, in this country, it was 18%.
Yeah. So can you speak a little bit more about...
50 years has seen this huge transition and the comfortability of American Jews to be part of the society.
So can you speak a little bit more about that subpopulation and how involved and engaged they are, and what should we be thinking differently about how we engage to attract, that community, the interfaith families, with and without kids?
So the interesting data point here is that if an intermarried family makes a choice about religion, they more often than not, make it Jewishly. We don't know all of the factors of why that is, but it's kind of exciting, and it's important for us to know. And usually the non-Jewish spouse becomes the driver of much of the choices, meaning she or he, having either studied to become Jewish or to learn more about Judaism through the basic courses available, begins to raise questions that the home, the lifestyle, the institutional choices, and the behaviors of the family ought to reflect this consciousness about what it may be or mean to be Jewish. So I think that's really kind of interesting. And the Brandeis folks who did this study are really curious about that factor as they are about young Jews and their behaviors. Those are the two outcomes that really interest Brandeis, because We want to understand how people make those choices to become Jewish, and in what ways do they find ways to engage, or are they engaging but outside of the synagogue world or outside of communal systems and simply a home-based sort of Judaism? So that's all very intriguing to the research world, but also to the real world of what happens on the ground.
So we got Len and then,
Yeah, are these practices, the patterns of Jewish practice and Jewish memberships, unique to Judaism, or what's happening in other religions also?
Religions, oh, sorry. So the question was, what's happening to other religions? So to comfort us a little bit, this is happening across the board. The Catholics and Protestants are going through huge changes as well. The rise of the religious nuns, N-O-N-E-S, none of the above. The religious nuns is the fastest growing part of American religion, and especially for young people. 1/3 of Americans who are under the age of 40 are telling us through all the studies, whether it's Gallup or Pew or any of the church studies, I'm out of here. So this religious nuns category affects all religions. So right across the way here is a Catholic church, Saint Cyrus of Jerusalem, or whatever its name. I apologize, I don't remember the. So they're struggling to find priests because the Catholic world has a dearth of priests. And if you think they are in trouble, the Protestants are merging, closing. I mean, the data on closing of Protestant churches in the United States is overwhelming. It's very scary. I mean, I saw data from the Protestants themselves that are telling us that 15,000 churches between now and 2025 will close. And it's caused by the fact of downsizing of members, costs of operation, absence of clergy, all the factors that we could imagine, some of which are similar to the Jewish community. And the advantage the Jewish community has is that we are a multi-ethnic religious construct. That is, you can be Jewish culturally, you can be Jewish in a variety of ways, including your gastronomic traditions, and you can be religious certainly through the religious content and text and tradition of the faith. So what we are observing amongst these different communities is they don't have as many points of connection as the Jewish community. So if a Jewish person says, I'm not interested in synagogue life, but I'm really interested in Jewish literature, films, or other expressions, whether it's from Israel to diaspora or anywhere along the spectrum of ideas, there are those options. That simply doesn't exist for Catholics and Protestants, and that gives them a fewer access points. The growth traditions in America, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Islam. But we see, and also sort of what they are calling third-party religions, groups that are sort of creating new and alternative religious models, and we have a few here in LA County that we're looking at because they're kind of interesting. They draw huge crowds of people who are seekers, and seekers are a real constituency, and the Jewish community has to sort of figure out how it gets into the gameplay of working with and reaching out to seekers, people who are of no religion or of switching religion. And by the way, switching of religion in America is big among 22 to 40-year-olds, really big. It's a high percentage of folks who are switchers, which may mean moving from an Orthodox community to a conservative to Reform, or it may mean out of Judaism to something outside of the Jewish scene, being a Buddhist or a humanist or a Unitarian, whatever it is. The fact is, religious switching is a real play in the American religious field.
Don't your own numbers, your economic numbers, give you the answer, at least in part, to why synagogue membership is declining? If many people I've tried to come here say we can't afford it. Simplest answer. I don't think that Unitarians handle people with dues, or even the Catholic Church doesn't say to them, all right, put up your shekels first. It seems to be primarily a problem of Jews.
Yeah, I mean, I think the cost of Jewish living has been an issue from the 1980s on. Some of you know the name Gerald Pubis, who was a member here at Valley Beshalom. Gerald, of blessed memory, did the first study for the American Jewish Committee on this issue of cost of Jewish living, estimating what it would cost if you were a family of four, in terms of synagogue, kashrut, Israel, charitable giving, synagogue membership, day school participation, and the numbers are extraordinary. And that was written, in the 1980s, 90s. One can extrapolate that those costs have gone up, and the challenges are certainly very much evident. So it is an issue for the community, and we haven't yet figured out a way forward to really be more responsive to that.
Yeah, I was just wondering, is there any way we could get a copy of this study?
In the system here, so it's there, it's fine, you can have it.
Yes, we can have a copy if, I'll see if we can put it on the website, but we also are recording this talk, so it is available at the vbs.org/Hazak website or web page. If you look at recordings, it'll probably be in tomorrow. So if you, okay. Well, I'll see if we can post it, if that's okay with you, since it's your property. If we can post it on our website along with, next to the recording, okay? So Steve, thank you very much. Very interesting. I think it raises a lot of questions for us as a community, as a Hazak community. Some of the points you made were about how welcoming we are to people who want to come. And, if they come and they don't feel noticed, they don't feel invited or welcome, they're just going to walk out. So part of our job